Good morning. It is Tuesday, June 9th, 8:01 this morning, and we are in Ephesians and should finish Ephesians tomorrow. Today we're going to be just doing 9 verses, which may go fairly quickly. We'll see how that goes, but Ephesians 6 verse 1 is where we're going to start, and this says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment, with a promise, so that it may go well with you, and that you may enjoy long life on the earth." Good morning. Paul's been talking about this over last chapter and this chapter too, about these relationships that we're in. He talked about husbands and wives yesterday. He's constantly, as I said yesterday, talking about how we serve other people. Jesus obviously telling us to love one another, to put ourselves second, others first. And so here we have this where Paul kind of started with the mom and dad, the husband and wife of a household, and now he's working his way down. So he says to children, he says, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, quoting Deuteronomy and the Ten Commandments. It's very interesting, though. He says the reason that we should honor our father and mother is so that it may go well with us, and we can enjoy a long life on earth. Some of us maybe found ourselves in spots when we didn't honor our father and mother, that we weren't sure our life was going to be long on this earth. But that's what Paul says, and he's quoting what the Ten Commandments say. But it's an interesting thing that just to at least tell a kid going, hey, listen, you may not want to, but if you want to live a long time, this would be good. But it's also establishing, reinforcing what he's already started talking about, that children would submit to their parents, that we would submit to one another in Christ, and so this is what he does. But he does it just like he did with husbands and wives. He then comes back in verse 4 and he says, "Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." So not only is there this call to children to honor their father and mother, but there's a call to the fathers, and we can expand this out and say parents generally, that some translations actually have the word fathers. They have parents instead, that we don't exasperate our children, which is this balance that is always being struck by Paul. Yesterday we talked about how it talks about the wife submitting to the husband, but then it goes on to speak. Paul goes on to speak even more about what the role of the husband is, to the point of that we have, as a husband, I have to love my wife. I have to give up my life for her, just like Jesus did. And so he does the same thing here. He says, "Children, obey your parents," but parents, just because I told them to obey you doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want. And he says, don't exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. And this goes all the way back to Deuteronomy, where it is Deuteronomy 6, where it's told that parents should be talking about the laws with their children when they wake up, when they go to sleep, when they're on their way, as they travel, to bind the verses on their foreheads and on their wrists and on their door frames, all of these things. And so he says, don't exasperate them, and train them in the instruction of the Lord. To have the parent is to be the person who passes this on to the next generation, right? As I would assume most of us who are watching this now, we're no longer in the phase where we have to obey our parents, but some of us are in the phase of having children, and so maybe for us we need to hear that this morning, that the exasperation piece is key, not to exasperate our children, but also that it is our job to continue to train them in the Lord. Verse 6, he then, so let me give a little background verse 5, before we get into verse 5. In the ancient world, particularly in Ephesus, there was tons of slavery, and I mean obviously there's modern day slavery as we know it, but in Ephesus it was purported that there maybe a third of the city was some sort of servant slash slave slash bond servant. And typically what would happen is when you got in debt to somebody, you had to work the debt off, and if you couldn't pay. And so a lot of households would have a bond servant, have a slave in their, basically as part of their family. And Paul here, much to the chagrin of many sort of modern readers, does not go after the institution of slavery. However, he does give instructions for both a slave and a master, particularly those who love Jesus, and what that would look like. And so he says this in verse 5. He says, "Slaves, obey your earthly master with respect and fear, and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but as slaves of Christ, do the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not people, because you know that the Lord will reward each one for whatever good they do, whether they are slave or free." And so he's given this instruction to slaves and just saying, listen, it's a tough deal you got, but this is where you're at. And so for life to be good for you, obey your master with respect and fear, and then serve out of a sincerity, and then obey just as you would obey Jesus. And he says, serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord and not people. And so he takes their unfortunate situation, again, because a lot of the slavery is out of debt that has to be repaid. It's not so much we've captured all of you and you're all now slaves. But he says, serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord and not people. And so Paul takes their bad situation and says, now let's do this for Jesus. Be Jesus where you're at and in your situation. And he says, because you know the Lord will reward each one for whatever good they do, whether they are slave or free. And I think that's a challenge for us too, because I mean, I'm not a slave, right? But the thing that he says here in verse 7, serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord and not people. I mean, I think that is just a across the board, like, good thing to do, whether that you would work as hard as you could, that you would serve and love people as if you were serving the Lord, and not just because you feel like you can get away with cutting a corner or something of that nature. And in verse 9, just to finish this section out, he says, "And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him." And so, again, Paul balancing this out, saying, listen, masters, you have a master too. If you believe in Jesus, then your master is in heaven, and remember that he is looking down on you. I mean, that's really what this is saying. He's saying, don't treat your slaves wrong. Treat them well. Be a master who loves Jesus and interacts with your slave, your bondservant, in such a way. And so there's this, we saw it yesterday and we see it again today, where there's a call to one half of a relationship, children, slaves, wives, and then there's the call to the other half of the relationship, husbands, parents, masters, and almost every time I would say, the call for the one who might be in more authority position, husbands, parents, and masters, like, there is a greater burden which is, I think, interesting. But it also reflects how Jesus approached things. Like those who had more power had more responsibility. Those who found themselves in positions of authority had more responsibility. I mean, there's even the verses that talk about like teachers being judged more harshly. Not like school teachers, but biblical teachers, that they will be judged more harshly. And so there's this. I think there's a beauty to it, because it is the Jesus was always about those on the margins, those who were disenfranchised, those who were poor, those who who needed healing and all of that. And so there's a call to those people to live a certain way, but then there's a call for everyone else who is in the majority to live a certain way. And I think it bears out here in these relationships within the home. That's why I think the NIV in chapter 5 calls it instructions for Christian households, right? Like Paul is laying out these foundations for how it is we are to live when we are in relationship with our spouse, with our children, with we don't have servants and slaves these days, but if that were the case, he lays all of that out, and all of it is love each other, put the other person first, serve each other as you would serve Christ, which for a lot, which is hard. We have, there's days when I don't want to do any of that, but that's what I'm called to. And that's what Paul was calling the Ephesian church to as well, to continue to be like Jesus to the people around you. If you find yourself in a weaker position, continue to love, serve, submit, obey, honor. If you find yourself in a stronger position, continue to love, serve, honor, submit. Like it doesn't matter where you're at. That's how we're to interact with each other. And I think that's a challenge because our society is not set up that way, as we see currently with all of the protests and such. There are those who find themselves in weaker positions who are speaking out, and if the world did it the way Jesus did, those who are in authority would love, and those who are in a weaker position would love as well. And hopefully we wouldn't have what we have now, but I think that's our challenge today, to just continue to love the people around us, continue to not see our position, if we feel like we're in an authority position, as somehow we are better than others. It says there's no favoritism with them in reference to God, and so we shouldn't have any ourselves. So let me pray for us today. God, we thank you for these verses, and we just thank you for the challenge to rethink or to analyze how our relationships are lined up, whether that be in marriage or in parenthood or in friendship, or whatever other relationships we would have. God, would you help us honor and respect and love and serve the people that we're in relationship with, as if we were loving, honoring, serving, respecting you. Help us to be the kind of people who do that, who love well, treat each other well, to treat those we don't know and those around us well, so that we will just be salt and light in the midst of a crazy, crazy season. God, we ask for a blessing over our day, and I would pray that these thoughts and these verses will stick with us throughout the day as we meditate on them. And God, we love you. We thank you for Jesus, and it's in his name we pray. Amen. Well, for all of you watching live, I certainly appreciate it, as always. I will see you tomorrow. We will finish off Ephesians 6, talking about the armor of God, and we'll be starting right about 8 a.m. tomorrow. Have a blessed day.